My wife said I disgusted her with the same voice she used to impress investors. It was 11:43 at night in our Boston penthouse, the city glowing beneath the windows like something polished and distant, and Meredith still wore the black dress from the dinner where everyone had called her the face of Brookswell Systems. I stood near the glass dining table holding the board consent folder she wanted me to sign before morning. She stood across from me with her earrings still on, her makeup perfect, her eyes colder than the skyline behind her. "You disgust me, Nathaniel," she said. Not shouted, not slurred, not thrown out in panic. Spoken clearly, like a decision she had already rehearsed. I looked down at the folder in my hand. Inside were documents authorizing a restructuring of voting control, a transfer review of her preferred shares, and an emergency consent packet Evan Sterling had prepared with language so clean it almost hid the blade. Almost. "You want me to sign this tonight?" I asked. Meredith's mouth tightened. "I need you to stop making everything difficult." Difficult. That was what she called any boundary after it got in the way of her image. I had written the first system architecture for Brookswell in a rented Cambridge office with heat that barely worked. I had mortgaged my first house to keep payroll alive. I had built the patent portfolio, negotiated the hospital pilots, and held the majority voting shares because every investor who came too close wanted to turn our mission into a market exit. Meredith knew that once. She used to say my caution kept the company alive. Now she looked at that same caution like it was something dirty on the bottom of her shoe. "Evan says the board needs confidence," she said. "Investors need to see a chief executive officer who is not chained to old fear." There it was. Evan's language in her mouth. Old fear. Founder drag. Legacy liability. Polished words men use when they want to steal the house without touching the front door. I looked at my wedding ring, the one she slid onto my finger 16 years ago when Brookswell was still 2 laptops, 1 prototype, and a stack of unpaid invoices. Back then, she said if the company survived, it would be because I never let go. Tonight, she wanted my hand only long enough to sign away what I had protected. "You are not ashamed of me," I said quietly. "You are ashamed that you still need my signature." Her face changed. Just a flicker. Truth passing through a locked room. Then she leaned closer and whispered, "Sign it, or get out of my way." I did not answer. I took off my ring, placed it on the glass table beside the consent folder, and watched the city lights reflect around it like a small, silent funeral. Meredith stared at it, confused for the first time all night. I turned, walked into my office, opened the safe, and took out the original shareholder agreement. The office door closed behind me with a soft click, and that was the loudest thing I allowed myself to do. Outside, Meredith remained in the dining room with the ring, the consent folder, and the kind of silence that arrives when someone realizes cruelty did not produce the reaction they expected. I did not lock the door. I did not need to. Locks are for people trying to keep someone out. I was finished trying to keep this marriage intact. My office faced the Charles River, but at night the window turned into a mirror, and I saw myself standing there in an old gray suit Meredith hated because she said it made me look like an engineer at a budget conference. She was not wrong. I was an engineer before I became a founder, before venture capital taught our company how to speak in words like scale, positioning, and market confidence. I still trusted systems more than speeches. That had always been my sin in Meredith's new world. I opened the safe behind the lower cabinet and removed the original shareholder agreement, the patent assignment records, the protective provisions, and the voting schedule. The paper smelled faintly of metal and time. 16 years of company history fit into a folder thinner than the one Evan wanted me to sign. That was how power works when it is real. It does not need to look large. Brookswell Systems began in a second-floor Cambridge office above a closed travel agency, where the radiator clanged all winter and the bathroom sink dripped no matter how many times I tightened it. Meredith used to sit cross-legged on the floor packing demo sensors into cardboard boxes while I coded until my eyes burned. We were building hospital monitoring software for rural clinics that could not afford the systems bigger companies ignored them with. She called hospitals. I fixed crashes. She pitched nurses. I rewrote modules. We ate cold pizza over product sketches and argued about whether a small company could make something that mattered without becoming the kind of company that forgot why it started. One night, after our first pilot site agreed to test the prototype, Meredith fell asleep against my shoulder at 2 in the morning and whispered, If this survives, it will be because you never let go. I believed her. Worse, I built my life around believing she meant we. The phone on my desk buzzed. Patricia Vance, our longtime corporate attorney, answered on the second ring, her voice awake in that calm lawyer way that suggests sleep is optional when documents are involved. Nathaniel, I need to stop an unauthorized transfer tonight. There was no pause wasted on surprise. Send me the packet. I scanned Evan's consent folder page by page, then sent the original agreement from the safe. While the files uploaded, I heard Meredith walking outside my office, heels slower now, less certain. She did not knock. Maybe she was waiting for me to come back and argue. Maybe she thought the ring was theater. I looked at the screen as Patricia's message appeared. Do not sign anything. Protective provisions are still active. Attempted transfer may trigger suspension review. I exhaled once, quietly. Outside the office, Meredith said my name through the door. I looked at the empty place on my finger where the ring had been and answered only to Patricia. Start the notices. At 12:18 in the morning, Patricia's first notice went out, and the night changed from marriage to record. There is a strange calm that comes when pain becomes paperwork. 5 minutes earlier, Meredith's words had still been moving through me like broken glass under skin. Now I was reading clauses I had written before either of us knew what kind of success could do to people. Transfer restrictions, protective provisions, founder voting block, breach review, data room access, board consent requirements. Dry language. Maybe, but dry language can hold a flood if it was built correctly. Patricia called again at 12:31. The Sterling managed vehicle has no authority to receive those shares without your consent, she said. The attempted transfer triggers review. We can suspend related voting rights pending board council confirmation. I looked at Evan's draft beside my keyboard. He had written it beautifully, the way men like him write theft when they want it to sound like governance. Strategic simplification, investor confidence, leadership clarity, founder alignment. Every phrase was polished enough to slide past tired eyes. But not mine. I had spent 16 years reading footnotes because footnotes are where men in expensive suits hide knives. Do it, I said. Suspend what the agreement allows. Preserve everything. Outside my office, Meredith knocked once. Not hard. Not gently. The sound of a woman trying to decide whether she was angry or afraid. Nathaniel, she said through the door, do not turn this into one of your dramatic silences. I almost opened the door then, not because I wanted to argue, but because that sentence showed me how little she understood me. My silence had never been dramatic. It had been the thing that let her speak first in investor rooms. It had been the thing that let her shine while I fixed the systems she promised on stage. It had been the thing that kept payroll alive when our Series B wire landed 3 days late, and she was in San Francisco telling reporters we were built for resilience. Silence was not absence. Silence was infrastructure. I turned back to the screen. Patricia sent the prepared notice for review. Meredith Brooks, Chief Executive Officer and Preferred Shareholder, attempted unauthorized transfer of restricted shares into Sterling Strategic Partners vehicle. Pending review, voting rights associated with disputed shares suspended. Evan Sterling's Strategic Committee data room access revoked. Emergency board consent postponed. I read it slowly, each sentence more final. Then the last. This was not revenge. Revenge would have been loud. Revenge would have wanted her humiliated before breakfast. I wanted the company protected from the woman who had mistaken my love for permission and from the man who had mistaken her ambition for a door into my work. At 12:49, I signed the electronic authorization with my majority holder credentials. The confirmation appeared in blue. Notice issued. Access revoked. Consent packet frozen. Behind me, the city reflected in the glass, bright and indifferent. I thought about the Cambridge office again, about Meredith laughing with tape stuck to her sleeve while packing demo kits, about her handwriting on the first hospital call list, about the way she used to believe mission mattered more than image. That woman had not disappeared all at once. She had been replaced one flattering dinner at a time, one board compliment, one magazine cover, one Evan Sterling whispering that she deserved a company without the man who remembered the unpaid invoices. My phone buzzed with a message from Patricia. Evan has attempted data room access twice. Both blocked. I saved the screenshot. Outside the door, Meredith's footsteps moved away. Maybe she thought I was sulking. Maybe she thought I would come out once pride cooled. She did not know I had already stopped waiting for her to understand what she had said. Some sentences do not start arguments. They endure us. At 1:07 in the morning, Evan Sterling called my personal number for the first time in 6 years of pretending we were merely professional acquaintances. I let it ring until it stopped. Then it rang again. Then Patricia texted me. Do not answer him directly. Counsel to counsel from this point forward. I placed the phone face down on my desk and opened the next folder. Patent assignment records. Original code repository rights. Hospital pilot agreements. Insurance warranties. Board observer limitations. The kind of documents Meredith once called impossible to explain in interviews, even though those documents were the reason she had a company to describe as visionary. Outside the office, the penthouse had gone quiet. Too quiet. I imagined her standing at the glass table, staring at the ring and consent folder, trying to decide whether I was punishing her or simply refusing to play the role she had assigned me. Maybe she checked her phone and saw Evan's name lighting up. Maybe she wondered why the man who sounded so certain at dinner was suddenly calling everyone after midnight. Confidence travels poorly once access is revoked. At 1:22, Patricia sent confirmation from board counsel. Emergency consent postponed pending review. I read the sentence twice. Postponed was polite. In board language, polite can be brutal. It meant the plan Meredith thought would slide through by morning had hit the wall I built years before she started resenting the wall for existing. At 1:36, Evan tried a different route. He emailed the independent director, copying Meredith, claiming there had been an overreaction by a legacy founder uncomfortable with modernization. Legacy founder. I almost smiled. That was one of his favorite phrases. It made theft sound young and resistance sound old. Patricia replied within 8 minutes with the original agreement attached, the disputed transfer language highlighted, and a reminder that unauthorized movement of restricted shares could expose all involved parties to review. Evan did not answer after that. Men like him enjoy pressure until it has citations. I stood from the desk and looked out over Boston. Below, the city kept glowing as if private disasters were nothing more than lights in expensive windows. Somewhere across the hall, Meredith opened a cabinet, then closed it. A glass touched marble. I knew that rhythm. She was pouring water with hands she did not want to admit were shaking. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her. Part of me did. Love does not vanish just because respect dies. That is what makes the ending of a marriage so cruel. You can know exactly why you must leave and still remember the person before the damage. I remembered Meredith in Cambridge, hair tied up with a pencil, laughing because the prototype alarm kept chirping every time the refrigerator compressor kicked on. I remembered her standing in front of our first hospital board, voice trembling but brave, saying small clinics deserve technology that did not treat them like leftovers. That woman could have let anything. This one had let Evan convince her that leading meant cutting away the man who knew where the company's bones were buried. At 1:58, I packed the original documents into a leather case. Not all of them. Only what was mine to carry. My passport, personal trust papers, founder records, patent copies, and the signed confirmations Patricia said I should keep offline. I left the wedding ring where it was. A ring belongs where the promise died. At 2:11, Meredith knocked again. Nathaniel opened the door. Her voice was different now. Less contempt. More alarm. I looked at the packed case, then at the empty place on my finger. No, I said quietly, though I knew she could not hear me through the wood. Then I turned off the desk lamp and let the room go dark. At 2:14 in the morning, the penthouse intercom chimed once, then went silent. Nobody came up. Nobody needed to. The building lobby was 23 floors below, marble, brass, and quiet night security. The kind of place Meredith chose because powerful people could disappear behind polished elevators and still feel seen. I checked the hallway camera from my office tablet and saw only the empty corridor outside our door. Pale carpet, soft lights. No movement except the faint shadow from the city through the glass. Meredith had stopped knocking. That worried me more than the knocking had. I put the leather case beside my desk and opened one last file from Patricia. It was the breach packet, clean and professional, every sentence restrained enough to survive a courtroom and sharp enough to stop a takeover. At 2:27, the formal notice reached Meredith, Evan, board counsel, and the independent directors. At 2:29, my phone buzzed with 3 calls from Meredith. I did not answer. At 2:31, she sent one text. What did you do? I stared at those 4 words for a long time. Not, what did I say? Not, are you all right? Not, Nathaniel, come talk to me. Only what did you do? As if the consequence were the offense and the wound before it did not matter. Patricia called at 2:36. Evan is claiming he relied on Meredith's authority. He did, I said. That was his mistake. Patricia's voice stayed even. His committee access is gone. The transfer vehicle is blocked. The independent directors are requesting a closed review at 9 o'clock. I looked toward the office door. And Meredith? Her voting rights tied to the disputed shares are suspended pending review. Her role is not terminated. Not tonight. But she cannot push the consent through. That mattered. I had no interest in burning Brookswell down just because my marriage had caught fire. The hospitals still used our systems. Employees still had mortgages, kids in school, parents in assisted living, car payments, grocery lists, real lives that should not become debris because 2 founders failed each other in a penthouse above Boston. Keep it narrow, I said. Only what the agreement allows. That is what we are doing. After the call, I opened the office door. Meredith stood in the dining room beside the glass table, barefoot now, her black dinner dress still perfect, but her posture changed. The ring was still where I had left it, small and silver beside Evan's folder. Her phone was in her hand. I saw my name on the screen from the calls I had refused. You froze my shares, she said. I froze an unauthorized transfer, I answered. She looked at me as if legal accuracy were a personal insult. You are trying to destroy me. No, my voice came out softer than I expected. I am stopping you from using my signature to destroy the agreement. Her eyes flashed toward the folder, then back to me. For 1 second, I saw fear under the anger. She finally understood that I had not been sulking behind that door. I had been remembering where the locks were. Evan said you would never do it, she whispered. There was the real confession, not romantic, not dramatic, just a sentence with another man's confidence sitting inside our marriage. I looked at the ring. Evan was wrong about what I would protect. Meredith swallowed. And us. I picked up the leather case from beside the office door. The weight of it felt heavier than paper should. You answered that before I opened the safe. Meredith stood between me and the front door, as if a doorway could hold together what respect no longer could. The penthouse was silent around us. All glass, marble, and expensive furniture chosen to look effortless in magazine photos. The city below had faded into a blue-black haze, and for the first time all night, she looked less like the woman on stage at investor dinners and more like the woman who once counted quarters with me at a laundromat in Cambridge because our first company check had not cleared. That memory almost stopped me. Almost. She looked at the leather case in my hand. Where are you going? Away from here. For the night. I did not answer quickly, because some answers deserve enough silence to become real before they are spoken. For as long as I need to remember who I am without you telling me. Her face tightened, and I saw the old Meredith rise for half a second. The one who used intelligence as a shield before pride learned to use cruelty as a weapon. You are making this sound like I am the only one who changed. I nodded once. No, I changed too. I became too willing to be useful instead of loved. She looked down at the ring on the table. The consent folder sat beside it, still open, still waiting for a signature that was never coming. I was angry, she said. The words arrived late, wearing a coat that did not fit them. You were precise. She flinched, not because I raised my voice, but because I did not. Anger gives people something to fight. Calm leaves them alone with meaning. Her phone buzzed again. Evan. His name appeared on the screen like a stain under glass. Meredith turned it over too quickly, but I had already seen it. He is scared, I said. That is why he keeps calling. He is worried about the company. No. He is worried that the door he thought you opened had a lock he did not know about. Her eyes filled, but I could not tell whether the tears were for me, for the company, or for the version of herself that had believed a man like Evan Sterling could crown her without taking something first. Nathaniel, please. We can talk in the morning. It is morning now. I looked at the clock on the wall. 2:52, and we already talked. You said what you had been taught to believe. That is not fair. Neither was asking me to sign away control while telling me I made you sick to look at. The sentence settled between us. She closed her eyes. For a moment, the penthouse felt smaller than that first Cambridge office, where there had been no view, no investors, no press profiles, only 2 people trying to build something honest. I wished I could go back and warn that younger man that success would not just test the company. It would test whether love could survive applause. Meredith opened her eyes again. I did not mean it like that. I looked at her carefully. Not cruelly. Carefully, because I still knew her face better than anyone. You meant it enough to say it when you thought I was cornered. Her mouth trembled. What happens at 9 o'clock? A closed review with board counsel. And me? You remain chief executive officer unless the board decides otherwise. I did not remove you tonight. Confusion crossed her face, followed by something like shame. Then why freeze the shares? Because you tried to move what was restricted. Because Evan tried to use your title to reach assets he had no right to touch. Because I loved you too long to let you confuse betrayal with authority. She stared at me, and I saw the exact moment she understood the worst part. I had not used all the power I had. I had used only what was necessary. That made it harder to call me the villain. I walked to the glass table, picked up Evan's folder, and slid it into the leather case. I left the ring exactly where it was. Meredith whispered, "You are leaving it." I looked at the small circle of metal shining under the city light. "That was yours to honor too." Then I walked around her, not touching her, not rushing, not looking back until my hand was on the door. Behind me, her phone started ringing again. This time, she did not pick it up. The hallway outside our penthouse felt colder than it should have. Or maybe that was only what leaving feels like when you finally stop pretending home is still behind you. I stood in front of the private elevator with the leather case in my right hand and nothing on my left hand but the pale mark where a ring had been for 16 years. Behind the door, Meredith did not call my name. That almost hurt more than if she had. The elevator arrived without a sound. Polished steel doors opening onto my reflection, older than I felt that morning and younger than I had looked while begging a marriage to remember me. I stepped inside and pressed lobby. As the numbers dropped from 23 to 1, my phone buzzed again. "Patricia, are you safe to talk?" she asked. "Yes." The independent directors have acknowledged the review. Evan's counsel is asking whether there is a path to restore access before market hours. I looked at my reflection in the elevator wall. There is not. That is what I told them. The elevator passed the 10th floor. Patricia's voice softened. Not much, but enough for someone who had known me since Brookswell was a tax identification number and a leased copier. "Nathaniel, Meredith just sent a message to board counsel asking whether you have authority to suspend her voting rights." I almost laughed, but the sound would have been too tired to survive. "Send her the signature page." Already did. Of course she had. That was why I trusted Patricia. She did not dramatize truth. She delivered it with page numbers. The lobby was empty except for the night security guard, Mr. Albright, who had worked there since we moved in. He looked up from the desk, saw the leather case, saw my face, and had the grace not to ask the obvious. "Early flight, Mr. Brooks?" he said. Something like that. He nodded and pressed the door release. Outside, Boston was still mostly asleep, the streets damp from a light mist, the air sharp enough to wake whatever grief had not fully landed yet. My car was in the garage, a dark gray Range Rover Meredith once told me was too plain for someone at our level. I liked it because it started every time and did not need to be admired. By 3:17, I was on Interstate 93 heading north, the city shrinking behind me in the rearview mirror. My phone stayed face down in the passenger seat, buzzing every few minutes. Meredith. Evan. Patricia. One independent director. Meredith again. I did not pick it up until Patricia called twice in a row. "Go ahead," I said. "Evan is claiming the disputed transfer was only exploratory. He attached executed routing instructions." "Yes," Patricia said. "That is why the claim is not aging well." For the first time all night, I felt something close to air enter my chest. Not victory. Victory would have required wanting her to lose. What I felt was the quiet relief of a door closing before the fire reached the walls. Patricia continued, "The 9 o'clock review will proceed. You do not have to attend in person. We can patch you in from wherever you are." I looked at the highway signs for New Hampshire and Maine. "I will be reachable. Does Meredith know where you are going?" "No," there was a pause. "Do you want her to?" I watched the road, the white lane markers appearing and vanishing under the headlights. "Not tonight." The answer was smaller than the pain, but it was honest. At 3:40, Patricia sent the final confirmation. Breach notices served, data room access revoked, consent packet frozen, disputed shares under review. I pulled into a rest area near the New Hampshire line and parked beneath a yellow light. For 1 minute, I sat without moving. No boardroom, no penthouse, no wife telling me what my silence was worth. Just the soft hum of the engine and a hand that no longer knew what to do without the weight of a ring. Then Meredith's text appeared on the screen. Please come back so we can fix this before everyone finds out. I read it twice. Before everyone finds out. Even then, her first fear was the audience. I placed the phone back on the seat, drove north, and let the message go unanswered. By 5:48 in the morning, the sky over Maine had begun to turn the color of wet slate. I was still on the road, moving past dark pine trees and quiet exits, with the Atlantic somewhere beyond the black line of the horizon. The house I was driving toward was not grand. Meredith had never cared for it because there was no lobby, no view worth putting in a magazine, no place to host investors without explaining why the furniture looked chosen for comfort instead of photographs. I bought it 8 years earlier through my personal trust after a hospital installation in Portland ran 3 days long, and I realized I could breathe better near cold water. Meredith came once, looked at the old cedar siding, and said it felt like a place someone went to disappear. She meant it as criticism. That morning, it sounded like shelter. At 6:05, my phone lit up with Patricia's name. I answered through the car speaker. Meredith has received the full notice packet, she said. She is awake. I looked at the road ahead, pale now under the first light. How did she take it? She called board counsel, then me, then Evan, then me again. In that order? Yes. That told me enough. Counsel first meant control. Evan second meant panic. Me nowhere meant pride still had its hand over the wound. Patricia continued. She asked whether your absence affects the review. It does not. Correct. I told her you can appear remotely. There was a pause. Then Patricia added, Evan's counsel is now describing his role as informal advisory support. I let out a quiet breath. Last night, he was restructuring governance. By breakfast, he is apparently a motivational consultant. I did not smile, but the corner of something tired in me moved. Dawn does strange things to Betrayal. In the dark, everything feels sharp. In the first light, you start seeing the shape of what was always there. Evan had not made Meredith contemptuous. He had only given her prettier words for contempt she had already allowed to grow. He had praised the version of her that wanted applause more than partnership, and she had mistaken that praise for vision. I turned onto the coastal road. The ocean appeared in pieces through the trees, gray and restless. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Meredith. I let the call pass to voicemail. A minute later, a text appeared. Nathaniel, please answer. I need to understand what happens now. Need. Not want. Not sorry. Not I should not have said it. Need was practical. Need belonged to damage control. I pulled into the gravel drive of the Cedar house at 6:27. The tires crunched loudly in the empty morning. Inside, the place smelled faintly of wood, salt, and closed rooms. I set the leather case on the kitchen table and opened the blinds. The ocean was about 200 yards away, beyond a strip of dune grass moving in the wind. There was no skyline reflected in glass here. Nothing looked expensive enough to lie. Patricia sent the board review link for 9 o'clock, then another message. Meredith found your envelope. I stood still. I had left it on the penthouse table before walking out, tucked beneath the edge of Evan's folder, because I knew she would touch the folder first. Inside was not a speech. It was not an accusation. It was a copy of the protective provisions, a list of personal items I would arrange to collect through counsel, and one handwritten line. You said I disgust you. I believed you enough to leave. At 6:41, Meredith left a voicemail. I did not play it. Not yet. I walked to the kitchen sink, ran cold water over my hands, and looked at the pale ring mark on my finger. For 16 years, I had mistaken endurance for devotion. That morning, with the ocean outside and the review still ahead, I finally understood that silence could be more than pain. It could be the first clean thing left. At 8:57 in the morning, I sat at the kitchen table in the Cedar house with the laptop open, the ocean gray beyond the windows, and the leather case beside my chair like a witness. The board review link waited on the screen. My coffee had gone cold. I had slept nowhere, but for the first time in years, I was not tired from being useful to someone who confused usefulness with love. At 9 o'clock, the meeting opened. Patricia appeared first, calm and exact. Then board counsel. Then 2 independent directors. Meredith joined from the Boston penthouse, her face carefully composed, though the room behind her betrayed more than she did. The glass table was visible over her shoulder. The ring was still there. So was Evan's folder. Evan joined from a different office with a background too bright and a smile too practiced. The smile lasted until board counsel began reading the timeline. Unauthorized transfer documents prepared through Sterling Strategic Partners. Emergency consent packet circulated without required founder approval. Restricted shares routed toward a vehicle with no authority to receive them. Data room access used after midnight after governance review had begun. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. In rooms like that, consequences arrive in complete sentences. Meredith kept her eyes forward, but every time Evan spoke, she looked smaller. He said the transfer was preliminary. Patricia displayed the executed routing instructions. He said he had relied on Meredith's authority. Board counsel read the section requiring my written consent. He said the purpose was investor confidence. One independent director, a retired hospital executive named Elaine Porter, asked, "Investor confidence in what, Mr. Sterling?" "A process designed to bypass the controlling agreement." Evan stopped smiling completely then. Meredith finally spoke at 9:31. "I did not understand the transfer restriction would apply this way." I looked at her through the screen. 16 years together, and I knew the difference between ignorance and regret. She understood enough to wait until after dinner. She understood enough to put the folder in my hand after telling me I was the thing standing in her way. She just had not understood that the quiet man she was ashamed of had built the quiet protections she could not outrun. Patricia did not embarrass her. She simply said, "The agreement is clear." At 9:48, the board voted to maintain the suspension of disputed voting rights pending full review, revoke Evans' committee access indefinitely, and postpone all restructuring consent until independent counsel completed findings. Meredith remained chief executive officer under oversight. Evan was removed from every Brookswell channel before the meeting ended. It was not dramatic. It was worse for them than dramatic. It was official. After the call, I closed the laptop and sat with the sound of waves hitting the rocks 200 yards away. My phone buzzed. Meredith. This time, I played the voicemail. Her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. "Nathaniel," I read the note. "I should never have said that. Evan made me believe I had to choose between being respected and being married to you." She paused, and I heard the penthouse silence behind her. But I chose the words. "I know that now." I set the phone down without answering. Outside, the morning had brightened, and gulls moved over the water like torn pieces of paper. I did not hate her. That surprised me. Hate would have been easier. Hate gives you something to carry when love becomes too heavy. What I had was grief, and under it, a clean line I could finally see. I typed one message to Patricia. "Please arrange future communication through counsel." Then I opened the kitchen drawer where I kept a spare house key, placed it on the table, and looked at the empty finger where my ring had been. In Boston, Meredith still had the ring, the folder, and the company she once wanted to build with me. In Maine, I had silence, cold coffee, and the first morning of a life where nobody got to call my dignity a liability again.